My ex left me pregnant after believing fake cheating rumors from his ex-girlfriend. Now he wants our son back after she cheated on him. My ex-husband might be the most entitled man I've ever met. Leaving him was probably one of the best decisions I've made, and for a while, I thought I could finally live in peace. But, of course, here he is again, somehow finding a way to stir things up. Let me give you some context. 8 years ago, I was married to my now ex-husband, Ethan. At the time, I thought our relationship was rock solid. We had dated for 2 years, been engaged for almost a year while planning the wedding, and finally tied the knot. I was head over heels, the kind of love where you'd fight tooth and nail to protect the relationship. I genuinely thought we were soulmates, but clearly, I was wrong. A couple of months after our wedding, Ethan lost his job. It was a rough patch for us, but I was confident we could weather it together. We had some savings, and I was working full-time, so I figured it was only a matter of time before he found something new. It took longer than expected, countless interviews, endless applications, but eventually he landed a new role. I still remember how happy we both were when he got the offer. I even took him out to dinner to celebrate. Little did I know that this job would end up destroying our marriage. On his first day at the new company, he came home looking off. I expected excitement, but instead, he seemed stressed and anxious. I asked what was wrong, and that's when he dropped the bombshell. His ex-girlfriend, Jessica, worked at the same company. I knew about Jessica. Ethan had dated her for 3 years, even proposed, but she turned him down and ended things. That breakup happened before he and I met, but I knew it had been rough on him. We never talked much about past relationships, but in that one conversation we did have about Jessica, it was obvious she'd left a mark. Hearing her name made my stomach drop. Of all people, it had to be her? I didn't know how to react. I mean, it had been years, and I trusted Ethan when he said he had no lingering feelings for her, but the thought of them working together made me uncomfortable. Ethan was visibly upset too. We spent hours that night talking about what to do. He even offered to quit the job, but with our savings dwindling and me covering all the bills, I knew we couldn't afford for him to be unemployed again. I told myself we were adults. Quitting a job over an ex was childish. Besides, he reassured me. He said Jessica worked in a different department, and they wouldn't be crossing paths. He promised not to engage with her unless it was absolutely necessary for work and swore he'd tell me if they ever had to interact. That made me feel better. I was proud of us for handling it like adults and not letting the past interfere with our present. Over the next few weeks, I stopped thinking about Jessica entirely. Ethan was as loving and attentive as ever, and I thought we'd moved past that hurdle. But looking back now, I laugh at how naive I was. I was so blinded by my trust in Ethan that I didn't notice the red flags waving right in front of me. A couple of months into his new job, Ethan had to go on a business trip. He told me that if it went well, there was a chance he'd get a promotion. I was genuinely excited for him. I even suggested I tag along and make it a mini getaway for us, but he shot the idea down, saying it was all work and no play. He added that it was an all-male team going, and no one was bringing their spouses or girlfriends, so I'd probably feel out of place. I was a little disappointed, but his explanation made sense. Or at least I thought it did. After that first trip, there were more. About once a month, sometimes more. I kept asking about the promotion, but there was always an excuse. The company wants more meetings with the contractor, or they're still deciding. I didn't get suspicious. Instead, I worried. I was concerned that the company was making him work so hard without properly compensating him. And through all this, Jessica didn't cross my mind once. We never spoke about her again after that initial conversation. It felt unnecessary. I thought I had nothing to worry about. But, of course, I was wrong. When I told my friends about this during the divorce, they couldn't believe how naive I had been, trusting him so blindly. And, honestly, I can't blame them. Looking back now, I completely agree with my friends. They were right. I was too trusting, too naive. But back then, I would have trusted Ethan with my life. 5 months into his new job, I realized I'd missed my period. I didn't think much of it at first, stress, irregular cycles, all that. But to ease my mind, I decided to take a pregnancy test. I still remember sitting on the bathroom floor, waiting for the result, not really expecting anything. But there it was. 2 pink lines. Positive. I was in complete shock. This wasn't a planned pregnancy, not even close. But after the initial wave of surprise, I started to feel excited. We weren't in a bad place financially anymore. Ethan had a stable job, I was working full-time, and we were finally finding our rhythm again. Maybe this was a blessing in disguise. Ethan was away on another business trip when I took the test, but he was coming home that night. I decided to wait and tell him in person. I spent the whole day imagining how it would go, him walking through the door, me sharing the news, both of us celebrating this new chapter together. I still remember that evening so clearly. It was late by the time he got home, and I had stayed up, waiting to have dinner together. As soon as he walked in, though, I knew something was off. He looked stressed, distant, not the happy, relaxed version of him I was hoping for. I asked if everything was okay, and he just sighed, muttering something about work and how exhausting the trip had been. I figured this news would be the perfect way to cheer him up. I have something that might make you feel better, I said, trying to sound upbeat. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I grabbed the test from the drawer, came back into the living room, and told him to close his eyes. When he opened them, I was holding the positive test in front of him. For a moment, he just stared at it. No reaction. No smile. No excitement. Just blank. I laughed nervously. It's positive. We're going to be parents. Still nothing. His face didn't change. Ethan, aren't you happy? I asked, my excitement quickly turning into anxiety. He rubbed his hand over his face, finally letting out a deep breath. I'm just shocked. I didn't expect this. Neither did I replied, trying to keep things light. But maybe it's a good thing? We're in a good place now. We can do this together. But he still seemed uncomfortable. After a long pause, he muttered, I need some time to think. That crushed me. I wasn't expecting a massive celebration, but I thought he'd at least be supportive, even if he was shocked. His reaction felt cold, almost distant. I told him as much, saying I was disappointed in how he was handling it. That's when things escalated. You can't expect me to be overjoyed about something this huge without even being part of the decision, he snapped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't just about you, Ethan. We're married. We're in this together. If you can't be a good husband about this, maybe we need to rethink this whole marriage. I said it out of anger, not really meaning it. But his response? I'll never forget it. Maybe we do, he said flatly and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, stunned. I sat on the couch, crying into a pillow for what felt like hours. I expected him to come back and apologize or at least check on me. But he didn't. I ended up falling asleep on the couch, too heartbroken to go back to our bedroom. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of him in the kitchen, making breakfast. He was already dressed for work. I got up, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, but he barely acknowledged me. I stood there, waiting for him to say something, but after a few awkward moments, he grabbed his bag, walked to the door, and left without a word. I spent that day crying my eyes out. I called in sick to work and spent hours on the phone with my mom and friends, telling them what had happened. They tried to console me, but nothing helped. I felt broken. By the time I knew he'd be coming home from work, I had rehearsed an entire speech in my head. I was ready to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much I needed him to be a better husband, especially now that we were going to be parents. But I had no idea what was coming. As soon as he walked in, he dropped his bag by the door and said, "We need to talk." "Yeah, we do," I replied, thinking this was finally my chance to say everything I'd been holding in. We sat down across from each other at the dining table. I took a deep breath, ready to start, but before I could speak, he beat me to it. "Whose baby is it?" he asked. I blinked, confused. "What?" He repeated it, this time slower. "Whose baby is it?" I was stunned. I actually thought I misheard him. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "It's ours. Who else's could it be?" He shook his head, refusing to look me in the eye. "Come on. Don't play games. I'm giving you a chance to be honest." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Ethan, I have never cheated on you. How can you even think that?" He sat there, stone-faced, repeating the same question over and over again. "Whose baby is it?" As if I'd eventually cave and say something different. I was crying by then, begging him to stop. "I love you. I would never do something like that. Why are you doing this?" But he just kept asking. I couldn't understand what was happening. This was the man I trusted completely, the man I thought was my soulmate, and now he was sitting across from me, treating me like a stranger, as if I was the villain in some story I didn't even know I was part of. And deep down, I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. I was completely clueless, just as confused as when this nightmare began. Ethan sat across from me, stone-faced, and repeated, "If you can't be honest with me, there's nothing left to say. I'm not raising another man's child." I was sobbing, my whole body shaking, as I kept telling him I'd never even thought about being with anyone else since the day I met him. I couldn't understand how he could accuse me of something so horrible. But he didn't stop. "The way you're always so eager for me to leave on business trips? That tells me everything I need to know about your loyalty." I was too stunned to even respond. Every single time he left for those trips, I felt sad. I stayed up late, waiting for him to call. I convinced myself to be supportive, to act like an adult, and back him in his career, especially after everything we'd been through when he lost his job. I stopped asking to tag along on trips because he made it clear it was all business, no time for fun. I even stopped calling more than once a day because he was always with clients or too busy. I did everything I could to support him, and now he was throwing it all back in my face? Hearing him say that I wanted him gone so I could be with another man felt like a slap. I felt sick, like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I told him everything, how I was just trying to be a good wife, how much I loved him, how ridiculous these accusations were, but it didn't matter. He sat there, cold and distant, shaking his head. "Stop trying to make me the villain here," he snapped. "I'm done feeling like an idiot. I'm done letting you make a fool out of me." I begged him to believe me. "Ethan, I've never been with anyone else. Why would you think this?" He threw his hands up. "Because you're distant. You don't even seem happy when I come home. You act like you'd rather I stay away. I'm not blind. His words cut deep. I had been distant, but only because I was walking on eggshells, trying to be supportive, trying not to bother him when he was busy, trying to hold everything together. I asked him if he had any proof, anything at all, to back up these insane accusations. I don't need proof, he scoffed. It's obvious to anyone with half a brain. I sat there, completely defeated. What more could I say? I'd offered to let him look at my phone, my emails, anything. He refused, saying, like I'm gonna find anything. You probably deleted everything already. At that point, I realized logic wasn't going to work. He had made up his mind. I asked him what he needed me to do to prove my loyalty. I even offered, God, I still can't believe I said this, to get a paternity test after the baby was born. Saying it out loud felt like a punch to my self-respect. Never in my life had I thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to prove something like that. But even that wasn't enough. I'm not waiting 9 months for a betrayal, he spat. I'm not helping you raise someone else's kid. That's when I completely broke down. I screamed at him, called him a delusional freak for even thinking I'd cheat on him. But it didn't matter. If you want this marriage to work, he said coldly, you'll get an abortion. I was horrified. I asked him if he even realized what he was saying. He didn't flinch. What if I don't? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Then it's divorce. That word, divorce, hit me like a freight train. I asked him again, desperate, are you serious? Dead serious, he replied. Something inside me snapped at that moment. It was like all the sadness, all the heartbreak, just burned away. I stood up and told him, fine, do whatever you want. But I'm keeping this baby with or without you. He just glared at me. Well, I hope you didn't sleep with a deadbeat. And then he walked out. That was the last time we were in that house together. Later that night, I got a text from him. He said he'd come by to get his stuff and asked me to let him know when I wouldn't be home. I told him when I'd be out, made it clear I didn't want to see him again. The next day, I met with a lawyer. We had bought that house together, our first home. I wanted everything to be quick and as drama-free as possible. Ethan seemed to want the same. We agreed to sell the house and split the money. Everything else? We just took whatever we wanted. I moved in with my sister while I figured things out. As for Ethan, I have no idea where he went, and I didn't care to ask. We didn't keep in touch. Not even through friends. It was like he'd just disappeared from my life. Telling people what had happened was exhausting. No one in our circles saw it coming. Every time I tried to explain, I'd break down in tears. Over and over again. But through it all, Ethan never wavered. He refused to hear me out, refused to listen to anyone else. In his mind, he was right, and I was the liar who had betrayed him. After everything, Ethan still insisted I hadn't been faithful. It was like he was living in a completely different reality. Some of his co-workers' wives, women I had been friendly with, told me that he'd been going around the office, painting me as the villain. He told them I didn't care about him, that I never put any effort into our marriage, and that I was probably cheating on him. The whole divorce felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. There were moments when I even started questioning myself, wondering if, somehow, I had done something wrong to make him feel so unwanted. More than anything, I wanted to talk it out, to make him see the truth, but he completely shut me out. When my son was born, I texted Ethan to let him know. No response. Months passed. I focused on my newborn, but the pain never fully went away. Then, one day, one of the wives reached out to me. She asked if I'd heard anything about Ethan. I told her no, that we hadn't been in contact since the divorce. She hesitated before saying, I'm really sorry to be the one to tell you this, but he got back together with Jessica. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. She explained that they'd been seeing each other for months, long before the divorce was even finalized. All those business trips? They weren't business at all. He'd been spending that time with Jessica. The worst part? Jessica had been the one who planted the idea in his head that I was cheating. According to my friend, Jessica told him things like, if I had a man, I'd never let him leave my side, and fed him a bunch of lies, convincing him that I was the one being unfaithful. I found out all of this because a couple of my friends pretended to befriend Jessica just to get the truth. Turns out, Jessica was smug about the whole thing, bragging about how she won Ethan back and how it was only a matter of time before I was out of the picture. Hearing all of that broke me. I spiraled into one of the darkest periods of my life. I fell into a deep depression, barely functioning most days. I had to quit my job. I just couldn't handle it. I moved in with my sister, who became my lifeline. She helped me take care of my son, reminding me every day that I was stronger than I felt. It took months, maybe over a year, but I eventually pulled myself out of that darkness. Slowly, I stopped obsessing over Ethan and Jessica. I focused on my son, found a new job, and got a place of my own. I finally felt like I was moving on. And then, something incredible happened. I met someone new. 2 years ago, I married an amazing man, someone who loves me deeply and treats me like a queen. More importantly, he loves my son as if he were his own. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and from day one, he stepped up as a father figure. A year ago, on our wedding anniversary, he officially adopted my son. We became a family in every sense of the word. I truly thought I was done with Ethan forever. But, of course, life had other plans. A few weeks ago, I was mindlessly scrolling through Facebook when a notification popped up, a message from Ethan. My heart stopped. We hadn't had any contact for years. Seeing his name pop up felt strange. I debated ignoring it, maybe even blocking him, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message. It was long, one of those rambling, emotional texts. He started by saying he'd been trying to reach me, but since I'd changed my number and moved, he had no way of contacting me. He explained that he and Jessica had broken up. Apparently, she'd been cheating on him with multiple men. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then he got into the emotional stuff. How he'd spent the last 8 years thinking about me and our son, how he regretted everything, how he wished he'd never let Jessica come between us. He admitted he was too ashamed to reach out before, but now wanted to be part of his son's life. He promised he'd do anything to prove himself worthy of being a father. I just sat there, staring at my phone, stunned. The poetic justice of it all, Jessica cheating on him after she manipulated him into thinking I was the unfaithful one, was almost too perfect. I thought about ignoring him. I thought about sending a scathing reply. But then, the petty side of me kicked in. He didn't know it, but legally, he had no rights over my son. When I gave birth, I chose not to list him on the birth certificate. He hadn't cared back then, so why should I? And now, my husband, my amazing, loving husband, had legally adopted my son. Ethan had no claim over him. So, I decided to have a little fun. I typed out a simple message. I'm not sure what you're talking about. My son was never yours to begin with. My husband adopted him a year ago. And then I hit send. No follow-up. No explanations. Just that. He read the message within minutes. No reply. It was petty. It was vindictive. But after everything he put me through, it felt cathartic. I looked over at my husband and our son playing together in the living room, laughter filling the house, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. I wasn't done yet. After sending Ethan that message about my son never being his, I decided to twist the knife just a little deeper. I followed up with, whatever Jessica made you believe all those years ago. She was right. You're exactly the kind of man who gets cheated on. And now, you're all alone. You deserve that. Then, just to add the cherry on top, I sent him a picture of me, my husband, and our son, smiling, happy, a real family. The family he threw away. Finally, I ended with, don't ever contact me again, and blocked him. Of course, what I said about my son not being his biological child wasn't true, but that didn't matter. Ethan had lost any right to my son long before he was even born. He made his choice when he walked away, and I wasn't about to let him wiggle back into our lives now. I told my husband what I'd done. I was half expecting him to be a little shocked, but instead, he just laughed and said, wow, you didn't have to go that hard. But I could tell he wasn't upset. He understood. He always does. A few nights later, I couldn't shake the curiosity, so I reached out to Laura, a friend whose husband used to work with Ethan. I casually asked if she'd heard anything about him lately. Turns out, she had. Apparently, Ethan had been spiraling ever since his breakup with Jessica. He'd shown up to work drunk multiple times and was on the verge of getting fired. Laura didn't know about the message I'd sent him, so she assumed his breakdown was all because of Jessica leaving him. I just listened, acting shocked, while inside, I was, well, not proud, but definitely not sad. I didn't tell my husband about that conversation right away. For some reason, a small pang of guilt had started creeping in. Maybe I'd gone too far. I mean, I'd effectively kicked a man while he was already down. But then I reminded myself of everything he put me through, the lies, the gaslighting, the abandonment, and that guilt quickly faded. Still, I wondered, did I take it too far? Update 1. Laura reached out to me again. Turns out, Ethan's spiral got even worse. One night, he and Jessica had a massive blowout in the office. Apparently, they were both working late, got into a heated argument, and things escalated fast. People saw them yelling, pushing each other around. It was a complete mess. Both of them were fired immediately. No one's heard from either of them since. Honestly, I'm just relieved he redirected his anger toward Jessica and didn't try to drag me into any of it. I don't want anything to do with him. Ever. I did end up telling Laura about the message I sent him. She was a little taken aback. While she hates Ethan for what he did to me, she told me she thought I might have taken things a bit too far. She even suggested I should reach out to him and tell him the truth, that my son is biologically his. I shut that idea down immediately. I told her I had zero intention of ever speaking to Ethan again. I don't care if he's miserable. I hope he is. More importantly, I don't trust him not to use that information to try and worm his way back into my son's life. Legally, he has no rights, but I refuse to take any chances. My son is happy, loved, and has an amazing father, the only one he's ever known. I'm not about to mess that up. Update 2. Since my last update, I've done a lot of reflecting. I sat down with my husband and had a long, honest conversation about everything. Ethan's message, my response, the guilt I was starting to feel, and what Laura had suggested. He was, as always, incredibly understanding. He told me that while he got why I did what I did, he also thought maybe I went a little overboard. We talked about how important it is to not let the past control our present happiness. That conversation really helped me put things into perspective. I realized that while my response to Ethan was petty, and, let's be honest, a little brutal, I don't regret standing up for myself and my son. Ethan made his choices. He walked away from us. He accused me of things I didn't do. And now, he has to live with those consequences. But my husband was right about one thing. I can't let resentment fester forever. It's not healthy. For me, for my marriage, or for my family. Update 3. After that talk with my husband, I decided to do something for myself. I reached out to a therapist. I wanted to work through some of these lingering feelings about Ethan and the entire mess he left behind. It's been eye-opening. Therapy has helped me realize how much anger I was still holding on to, even after all these years. I'm not doing this for Ethan. I couldn't care less about him. I'm doing this for me, for my marriage, for my son, and I feel lighter now. I haven't heard anything more about Ethan. Laura hasn't reached out again, and I haven't asked. I honestly don't care what happens to him. He's a grown man. His life is his responsibility. As for me, I'm doing great. My husband, my son, and I are happier than ever. We're a family, a real one, and I'm finally at peace.